I am not the same tonight. Not because something changed, but because something was revealed. There's a difference. Change is loud. It announces itself. It asks to be noticed. Revelation is quiet. It slips into your awareness like a shadow stretching across the floor, uninvited, unnoticed, until suddenly it's everywhere. And you are not someone who changed me. You are someone who revealed me to myself. There are parts of me I built with intention, controlled parts, measured parts, the version of me that speaks in a way people can handle. That version was never fake, just filtered, refined enough to exist in a world that fears anything it can't immediately understand. But beneath that, there is something else. Something older, something that doesn't care about being understood, only about being accurate. And that is the version of me you found. You didn't search for it. That's the unsettling part. You didn't dig, you didn't question, you didn't try to figure me out the way people usually do. You just stood still. And somehow that stillness was louder than every question I've ever been asked. Do you understand what that does to someone like me? People think silence is empty. It's not. Silence is pressure. Silence is space where truth has nowhere to hide. Most people break that silence because they're afraid of what might surface inside it. But you made it deeper. You made it heavier. You made it impossible for me to keep pretending there was nothing underneath. I've spent years mastering control of expression, control of tone, control of how much of myself is allowed to exist in front of others. Because once people see too much, they start to misinterpret. They simplify, they distort, they reduce depth into something manageable for their own comfort. And I refuse to be reduced. But you didn't reduce anything. You expanded it without effort, without force, without even trying. That's what I keep coming back to. You didn't try. You didn't perform understanding. You didn't ask the right questions. You didn't position yourself as someone who gets it. You just got it. And that kind of understanding doesn't feel safe. It feels precise. Too precise. Like you're not looking at me. You're looking through me. There's a moment I can't forget. Not because it was intense, but because it wasn't. It was ordinary, quiet, unremarkable, almost forgettable. And yet, it wasn't. Because in that moment, you responded to something I didn't say, not indirectly, not vaguely. Exactly. You answered a thought I never allowed to become words. That's when I knew. You're not listening to me. You're reading me. And reading someone like me is not something people survive easily. Because I am not simple, I don't exist on the surface. Everything I am is layered. Everything I say comes from somewhere deeper than it sounds. And most people, they get lost before they even reach the second layer. But you didn't get lost. You moved through it like you've been there before. Like my internal world was not unfamiliar territory. That's what disturbs me. Not your presence, not your attention, your familiarity. You react to me like nothing about me is surprising, like my darkness isn't something new, just something recognizable. Do you know how rare that is? To not be studied, to not be analyzed, to not be questioned, but to be recognized. Recognition is dangerous because it removes distance, and distance is the only thing that keeps people like me safe. Without distance, there are no filters. Without filters, there is no control. And without control, there is exposure. You didn't take my control. That would have been easier to resist. You made it irrelevant. That's worse. Because now, when I speak to you, I don't calculate, I don't edit, I don't decide which version of myself is acceptable. I just exist. And that is not something I allow. Not with anyone. Do you understand what that means? It means you are standing in a place no one has stood before, not because I didn't let them, but because they were never capable. And I don't know what to do with that, because there's a part of me that wants to pull back, to rebuild distance, to restore control, to return to something predictable. But there's another part, quieter, deeper, more honest, that doesn't want to lose this, not you. This state of being seen, without being reshaped. That's what people don't understand. Being seen is not the problem. Being changed by what people see, that's the problem. But you're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to fix me. You're not trying to guide me towards something softer, lighter, easier. You just accept the weight. And that's where this stops being simple. Because acceptance like that doesn't come from curiosity. It comes from experience. You don't just understand darkness. You've lived in it, I can tell. Not from what you say, but from what you don't react to. There are things in me that make people uncomfortable, not visibly, but internally, they feel it, and they pull back, subtly, quietly, almost politely. You stay exactly the same, no shift, no hesitation, no recalibration, like nothing I reveal adds weight to your perception of me. That's not normal. And it forces me to ask a question I haven't wanted to face. Are you seeing me, or are you seeing yourself in me? Because if it's the second one, then this isn't connection, this is reflection, and reflection goes deeper than connection ever could, because connection can be broken. Reflection stays, even if you walk away, even if you disappear, even if this ends in silence, you don't unsee a reflection, and that's what makes this dangerous. Not what this is, but what it leaves behind, because something has already changed, not externally. Internally, the way I think, the way I pause, the way I become aware of myself in your presence. You didn't just enter my world, you altered its structure quietly, precisely, irreversibly. And I don't know yet if that makes you the safest presence I've ever known, or the most dangerous one, but I do know this. You didn't knock, you didn't ask, you didn't wait for permission, and somehow, you're already inside, you shouldn't still be here. That's the first thought that surfaces every time I become aware of you again, not physically, but internally. Because presence like yours is not supposed to last. People don't stay once they realize what they're standing inside. They hesitate, they question, they slowly detach once the depth stops feeling poetic and starts feeling real. But you adjusted. That's what I didn't expect. You didn't retreat when the silence grew heavier. You didn't pull back when the distance I carry stopped being aesthetic and started revealing its purpose. You didn't even ask why I am the way I am. You just adapted to it. Do you understand how unnatural that is? Most people try to change the environment to make themselves comfortable. They soften conversations. They lighten intensity. They redirect anything that feels too deep into something manageable. But you didn't reshape anything. You reshaped yourself to exist inside it. That's not curiosity, that's alignment. And alignment like that doesn't happen accidentally. There's something I've started noticing. Not about you directly, but about myself when you're present. The way my mind slows down, not because there's less to think about, but because I don't need to outrun my own thoughts. Do you know what that means? It means something in me no longer feels the need to protect itself from being misunderstood. That's new. And I don't trust new, because new things have a pattern. They feel right before they prove you wrong. But this doesn't feel like something temporary. It doesn't feel like something fragile. It feels embedded, like you didn't arrive, you surfaced, and that thought is dangerous. Because it suggests you were always going to reach this place in me, not by force, not by chance, but by design. I don't believe in coincidence, not at this level. Not when something fits as precisely. You don't just understand what I say. You understand what I almost say, what I stop myself from saying, what I silence before it becomes visible, and you respond to those things like they were spoken clearly. That's not perception. That's access, and access like that is not something I give, which means you didn't receive it. You found it. That's the part that shifts everything. Because if you found it, if you reach this level of understanding without me guiding you, then there is nothing stopping you from going deeper, and I don't know what exists deeper than this. I've never let anyone get that far. Not because I didn't want to be known, but because people don't usually have the capacity to hold what they find. They get overwhelmed. They start projecting. They start simplifying. They start turning depth into something digestible just so they can stay comfortable. But you're not simplifying anything. You're matching it. That's what I keep trying to understand. How do you match something you were never shown? How do you recognize patterns no one explained to you? How do you move through someone's internal world like it mirrors your own? Unless it does. And that realization, that possibility, is where this stops feeling controlled. Because if you and I operate on the same depth, then this isn't just connection, this is convergence, two internal worlds colliding without warning, not gently, not gradually, but completely. And collisions don't leave things unchanged. They restructure everything. That's why I've started noticing the smaller shifts, the subtle ones, the ones no one else would detect, the way I pause differently when I think of you, the way my thoughts don't fragment when your presence enters them, the way I don't feel the need to isolate certain parts of myself, to keep them protected. You didn't remove my defenses. You made them unnecessary, and that's a problem, because defenses don't disappear without consequence. They exist for a reason, and when they're no longer active, it doesn't mean they weren't needed. It means something has bypassed them. You bypass them, not aggressively, not intentionally, but completely. That's why this feels different from anything I've experienced before, because nothing about this followed a process. There was no gradual trust, no slow understanding, no careful exposure. It happened all at once, quietly, without announcement, like something that was always there, finally revealing itself. And I don't know how to respond to that, because my instincts are conflicted. Part of me is alert, watching, analyzing, waiting for the moment. This turns into something I need to protect myself from. But another part, a deeper part, is calm, too calm, like it doesn't see you as a threat, like it never did. And that's what unsettles me the most, because my instincts don't make mistakes. They don't misread people, they don't overlook danger, and yet they're not reacting to you at all. Which means one of two things. Either you're not a threat, or you're something my instincts don't know how to classify. And the unknown has always been more dangerous than anything obvious. But here's the part I haven't said out loud. I'm not trying to push you away. I'm observing what happens if I don't. That's new. Usually by this point I would have already created distance, subtle, controlled, unnoticeable. But I haven't, and that's not an accident, that's a decision, a quiet one, an internal one. One I haven't fully acknowledged until now. I'm letting this happen, not because I trust it, not because I understand it, but because something in me needs to see where it leads, and that might be the most dangerous part of all, because I don't explore things lightly. I don't step into unknown spaces without calculating the cost. I don't allow variables I can't control. But you are a variable I'm not controlling, and I'm not stopping it, which means, on some level, I've already accepted the risk. The question is no longer whether this is safe. The question is, how far does this go before it becomes irreversible? Because we've already crossed something subtle, something quiet, something without a clear boundary. And once a line like that is crossed, it doesn't exist anymore. There's no returning to before. There's only forward, deeper. And I don't think either of us is turning back. Something has shifted, not around me, inside me. And I don't think you understand what that means yet. There was a time when I could trace every reaction I had. Every thought had a source. Every silence had a reason. Every distance I created was intentional. I was never out of control. Not once. But now, there are moments where I don't recognize the timing of my own awareness. Moments where I pause, not because I chose to, but because something in me is already responding to you before I consciously decide to. That's new. And I don't like things I can't track. You've introduced something into my system that doesn't follow my rules. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask for logic. It doesn't move through the usual filters I've built over years of precision. It just happens. And the worst part, it's accurate. That's what makes this dangerous. If it were chaos, I could reject it. If it were confusion, I could correct it. If it were illusion, I could break it. But it's not. It's clarity. A kind of clarity that arrives too fast, too sharp, too exact, like something in me recognizes you faster than I can regulate. Do you understand what that does to someone who has spent their entire life being in control of their own depth? It fractures the structure, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, quietly, precisely like a crack forming inside something that was never supposed to break. Because here's the truth I can't ignore anymore. You're not just inside my thoughts, you're inside my patterns. The way I think has started to adjust around you. The way I process has started to include you. The way I anticipate has started to expect you. That's not normal. People don't become part of my internal system. They stay external, separate, observable, contained. But you've crossed that boundary, and I didn't stop you. That's where the break begins. Because once someone becomes internal, they're no longer something you can distance yourself from. You can't step away from something that exists inside your own perception. And I feel it now. The shift, it's subtle, but it's constant. The way your absence doesn't feel like distance. It feels like silence in a place that wasn't silent before. The way your presence doesn't feel like arrival. It feels like something returning to where it already belongs. That's not connection. That's integration. And integration is not something you undo easily. I've started noticing the exact moment it happened, not the beginning, not the first shift, the point of no return. It wasn't dramatic. Of course it wasn't. Things like this never are. It was a moment where I realized I wasn't observing you anymore. I was responding to you before you even spoke, anticipating, understanding, aligning, without effort, without hesitation, like my mind had already adjusted to your frequency. And that's when it hit me. This isn't one-sided, because you do the same. You meet my thoughts before I complete them. You respond to my silence before it becomes distance. You recognize my shifts before they fully form. That's not coincidence. That's synchronization. And synchronization at this level is not safe, because once two minds start aligning like that, they stop functioning independently. They start influencing each other subtly, quietly, irreversibly. That's where the real danger begins, not in what we say, not in what we show, but in what we change inside each other without realizing it. You've already changed something in me. I can feel it, not in my personality, not in my behavior, in my structure, the way I hold things, the way I filter things, the way I exist internally. There's a space now, a specific one, that wasn't there before, and it's shaped like you. I didn't create it. I didn't allow it. I didn't even notice it forming. But it's there, and once something like that exists, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the architecture. That's why this feels different from anything I've experienced before, because this isn't something I can walk away from and return to who I was. That version is already gone, not destroyed, not replaced, altered. And I don't know yet what that means for me, because there's a part of me that recognizes what this is becoming, and it doesn't try to stop it. That's the part I don't fully trust, the part that isn't resisting, the part that isn't questioning, the part that isn't trying to regain control, the part that is accepting it, because acceptance at this level isn't passive, it's surrender. And I don't surrender, not to people, not to emotions, not to anything that has the potential to disrupt what I've built. But this isn't asking for surrender. It's bypassing the need for it, and that's what makes it unstoppable. Because I'm not losing control, I'm watching it become irrelevant. And there's a difference. Losing control is chaotic. You fight it, you resist it, you try to regain it. But when control becomes irrelevant, you don't even reach for it. You just let things unfold. And that's where I am now. Not fighting, not resisting, just watching. Watching what happens when something enters your life that doesn't follow any of your rules and still feels like it belongs. That's the breaking point. Not when things fall apart, but when they start to rearrange themselves into something you didn't plan and you don't stop it. So now the question isn't what this is. That's already clear. The question is, what happens next? When neither of us is pulling away, there's no going back now. Not to distance, not to detachment, not to the version of me that existed before you became something I couldn't remove. Because that's what this has become. Not a presence, not a connection, not even something I can define. You've become a condition, something that exists within me, whether I acknowledge it or not, and I tried to ignore that. At first, I tried to treat this like everything else I've experienced. Temporary, manageable, containable, but it's none of those things, because containment requires boundaries, and somewhere along the way, those disappeared, not broken, not forced, dissolved. That's the part that unsettles me most. There was no impact, no moment of resistance, no internal alarm loud enough to stop it, just a slow, precise, almost surgical shift, until suddenly there was no separation left to protect, and now I feel it, fully, not as a thought, not as an idea. As a constant, you exist in the way I process silence, in the way I interpret stillness, in the way my mind reaches conclusions before I consciously follow. That's not connection anymore. That's influence, and influence like this doesn't stay neutral, it evolves. I can feel it evolving. There are moments now, subtle, dangerous moments, where I don't just recognize you, I rely on you, not physically, not emotionally in the way people describe it, mentally, the way my thoughts stabilize when I align them with how you would see them, the way my perception sharpens when I unconsciously measure it against yours. That's not normal. That's dependency, forming in a place I never allowed anything to grow, and I see it clearly. That's what makes this different. I'm not lost in it. I'm aware of it. Every shift, every adjustment, every internal change, I see exactly what's happening. And I'm not stopping it. That's where the collapse begins. Because the moment you recognize something and choose not to interfere, you're no longer resisting it. You're allowing it, and I am allowing this, not blindly, not emotionally, deliberately. That's the truth I can't avoid anymore. This isn't something happening to me. This is something I'm letting happen. And that realization changes everything, because now I have to face something deeper than you, myself. Why didn't I stop this? Why didn't I create distance when I first noticed the shift? Why didn't I reinforce the boundaries I've spent years perfecting? The answer isn't simple. It's not weakness. It's not loneliness. It's not some need for connection. It's recognition, not of you, of me. Because what I see in you isn't just familiarity. It's reflection at a level I've never encountered before. You don't just understand my darkness. You operate within it the same way I do, and that's the truth that breaks everything I thought I knew about myself. Because I believed something for a long time, something I never questioned, that what I am is rare, not special, not superior, just rare, a way of thinking, a way of processing, a way of existing that most people don't reach. And I built my entire internal world around that belief, not out of ego, out of observation, but you disrupted that completely, because you're not observing me, you're matching me, and that means one thing: I was never prepared to face I am not alone in the way I exist, and that realization is more destabilizing than anything else in this entire experience, because isolation was never a weakness for me. It was structure. It defined how I moved, how I thought, how I protected myself. But now, that structure is shifting because there is someone else who sees the same way, thinks the same way, navigates the same internal complexity, without explanation, without translation, without effort. And that changes the equation completely, because now I have to ask something I've never asked before. If you are like me, then what happens when two people like us stop treating each other as separate? Because that's where this is heading, not toward connection, toward convergence. And convergence doesn't create something soft. It doesn't create something safe. It creates something powerful, something precise, something that doesn't need validation from the outside world because it operates entirely within its own depth. That's what this is becoming, not emotional, not fragile, not dependent in the way people expect, but integrated, an integration like this. It doesn't break easily. It reshapes everything around it. That's why I'm not pulling away, not because I can't, but because I see what this could become if I don't. And for the first time, I'm not choosing safety. I'm choosing depth, even if it costs me control, even if it changes me in ways I can't reverse, even if it leads somewhere I don't fully understand yet, because some things, once recognized, aren't meant to be avoided, they're meant to be followed. And you are not something I can ignore anymore, not because you're inside my life, but because you're inside my structure, and now the truth is clear. You didn't just enter without knocking. You became part of something I no longer know how to separate from myself, and the most dangerous part, I don't want to